'Twas Christmas, 1962, on the northern Labrador coast. The winter's hardship's nothing new, but this one worse than most. The steamer's crew almost got through, but finally lost the bet. With heavy ice you roll the dice, and plans are overset. And the steamer carries most with which a northerner endures, so not much grub upon the shelves at the hungry belly stores. But there's little fear, with lots of deer and partridge in the country. What haunts them now is another want, another kind of empty. For the basics weren't the only thing aboard that mail boat, and a steamer's not the only way to keep young hopes afloat. And who's the loving parent that it would ever want to see the innocence and sadness with no gifts beneath the tree? And so the desperate call went out from the northern town of Nain to the airline down in Goose Bay town. Could presents come by plane? But the storm had raged for 6 long days, and not a plane had flown as the pilot stepped into the cold and left the warmth of home. 'Twas -35 and black as pitch at 6 a.m., and the forecast called for some improvement as the day went on. Arriving at the hangar, daylight showing in the east, ceiling at 1,000 feet, viz. 2 miles at least. 600 horses came to life in a cloud of oily smoke, and as the engine warmed, the pilot knew he carried every hope of girls and boys for Christmas toys in the cabin of his plane, while anxious parents paced the floors in every house in Nain. But then he thought about his own, his wife and sons and daughter, the family picture clipped upon the panel of the Otter. With the weather bad, the doubts he had about this flight had grown. Would joy for families up in Nain bring heartbreak to his own? For judgment's not an easy thing, and hopes are hard to weigh. And he wondered if he'd do this flight on any other day. 2 hours north and 2 hours back this Christmas Eve for sure. As he lifted off in threatening skies, his doubts grew ever more. The northbound leg went well enough beneath the sullen cloud, and as he read his map upon his knee, he thought his thoughts out loud. 200 miles with not a sign of humankind to show how small a speck am I upon this shield of ice and snow. He landed in a whiteout on the harbour ice in Nain, and as he shut the engine down, he thought he heard the strain of woodwind, brass, and strings drifting softly from the land. 'Twas Handel's Great Messiah from the Inuit Brass Band. The willing hands of the Nainimut helped unload the plane. The anxious pilot took on fuel and then took off again. With the weather bad, he knew the southbound flight would be no lark. The days are short that time of year, and soon it would be dark. With the cloud base at 1,000 feet, he knew he'd get no higher, and he thought about his loving wife at home beside the fire, the excitement of his children as they gathered round the tree and waited for their father to come home this Christmas Eve. The snow was light at first and visibility not bad, but it came down thick and it came down quick. 2 miles was all he had. Descending 500 feet to keep the ground in sight, as time ticked by he realized that soon he'd lose the light. He knew the ridge lay right ahead, just past Witch Doctor Lake, and as he read his map in the gathering dusk, he knew just one mistake could end his life in the rock and ice that towered above his plane. With Viz now down to half a mile, he searched the ground in vain. Then fast as time, the ground was gone. He was swallowed by the snow. He'd had his chance to run for Postville back a while ago, and as fear rose up in the back of his throat, he cursed himself a fool and prayed to the man for a guiding hand past the ridge so hard and cruel. I guess the minutes seem like hours when each one could be your last, your universe a small cockpit with lighting softly cast. The engine seems to speak to you, its voice so calm and steady. Carolyn, Catherine, Noel, Eddie. Carolyn, Catherine, Noel, Eddie. Then in the swirling snow, a sudden shadow on the right, another to the left of him, both quickly lost to sight. And then the snow began to thin, and he thought that he could make a tree line out beneath his wings, or the shoreline round a lake. The weather cleared as quickly as it had closed not long ago, and with daylight fading in the west, the stars began to show. And as he hung suspended over the frozen, silent land, he offered up a prayer of thanks and considered the guiding hand. He had no recollection of the last part of the flight, the landing, or the drive back home that frosty northern night. He knelt before his children and embraced them tenderly, and kissed his wife and held her close beside the Christmas tree. And as he lay in bed that night, before he went to sleep, he thought about how close he'd come to the unseen ridge so steep, and the choices that a man can make, and who has the final say, and whether the wheel goes up or down on any given day. For judgment's not an easy thing, and hopes are hard to weigh. No, judgment's not an easy thing, and hopes are hard to weigh.